I also noticed it.
From the nation's capital, the State of the Union. Here is Tom Brokaw, NBC News in Washington.
Good evening from Capitol Hill. The State of the Union, of course, is the president's annual constitutional requirement to go to the Capitol Hill and report to Congress and the American people on how well we're doing. Tonight will be George Bush's inaugural State of the Union address, and as you might expect, he'll say, "We're doing very well, thank you very much," after one of the most tumultuous years in recent world history. The president will indicate that there are some problems to be solved in this country in the areas of the environment and education, and still he would like to have a capital gains tax cut, and he will make a bold proposal tonight about American troop levels in Europe. But at the same time, the president will say we're on the right track, we're a model for the rest of the world. This is the scene tonight now in the House chamber in Washington, D.C. As you can see, the president's cabinet being let in. James Baker in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. James Brady right next to him on the left. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, who was in on the decision with the president about reducing troop levels, or at least making that proposal, in a telephone call today to Mikhail Gorbachev. We also believe, of course, the president may have been checking on the political health of the Soviet president, given these rumors that he's about to resign as the Communist Party chief.
The President of the United States!
George Bush immediately trailed by a man who wanted his job, Richard Gephardt, Democrat congressman of Missouri, who is now the #2 Democrat in the House leadership. Whatever the party registration on these occasions, all the members want to reach out and shake the hands of the Chief Executive of the United States. A pat on the shoulder from Jim Baker, his old Texas friend and colleague and political campaign mentor. Tom Foley on the right-hand side of your screen there next to Dan Quayle, who is on the left. Tom Foley is the Speaker of the House. He'll make the response to the Democrats later. The president handing over copies of his speech, which is not expected to be terribly long. Mrs. Bush, equally well known as her husband and equally beloved. The president comes to this House chamber with a popularity rating of between 70 and 80%. Exceptionally high for a first term, first year. In fact, the highest that anyone can remember for a long time. In good shape with the people of this country, politically speaking. That's Marvin Bush, one of the Bush children who is a stockbroker here in Washington. There will be no other members of the family on this auspicious occasion, nor do we expect there will be any surprise guests in the gallery. President Reagan liked to have one of the American heroes that he would spotlight on these occasions. We don't think that Bush will follow that tradition.
Members of the Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you our former colleague, the President of the United States.
Former colleague is a reference to George Bush's tenure, however brief it may have been, as a member of the House of Representatives, representing the state of Texas, of course, which was his adopted home state. Although he did not preside in this chamber, he did sit behind the President of the United States for 8 years as the Vice President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, members of the United States Congress, I return as a former President of the Senate and a former member of this great House. And now, as President, it is my privilege to report to you on the State of the Union. Tonight, I come not to speak about the state of the government, not to detail every new initiative we plan for the coming year, nor describe every line in the budget. I'm here to speak to you and to the American people about the State of the Union, about our world, the changes we've seen, the challenges we face, and what that means for America. There are singular moments in history, dates that divide all that goes before from all that comes after. And many of us in this chamber have lived much of our lives in a world whose fundamental features were defined in 1945. And the events of that year decreed the shape of nations, the pace of progress, freedom or oppression for millions of people around the world. 1945 provided the common frame of reference, the compass points of the post-war era we've relied upon to understand ourselves. And that was our world until now. The events of the year just ended, the Revolution of '89, have been a chain reaction. Changes so striking that it marks the beginning of a new era in the world's affairs. Think back just 12 short months ago to the world we knew as 1989 began. One year ago, the people of Panama lived in fear under the thumb of a dictator. Today, democracy is restored. Panama is free. Operation Just Cause has achieved its objective, and the number of military personnel in Panama is now very close to what it was before the operation began. And tonight, I am announcing that well before the end of February, the additional numbers of American troops, the brave men and women of our armed forces who made this mission a success, will be back home. A year ago in Poland, Lech Wałęsa declared that he was ready to open a dialogue with the communist rulers of that country. And today, with the future of a free Poland in their own hands, members of Solidarity lead the Polish government. And a year ago, freedom's playwright Václav Havel languished as a prisoner in Prague. And today, it's Václav Havel, President of Czechoslovakia. And 1 year ago, Erich Honecker of East Germany claimed history as his guide, and he predicted the Berlin Wall would last another 100 years. And today, less than 1 year later, it's the wall that's history. Remarkable event. Remarkable events. Events that fulfill the long-held hopes of the American people. Events that validate the long-standing goals of American policy, a policy based on a single shining principle, the cause of freedom. America, not just a nation, but an idea, alive in the minds of people everywhere. As this new world takes shape, America stands at the center of a widening circle of freedom, today, tomorrow, and into the next century. Our nation is the enduring dream of every immigrant who ever set foot on these shores and the millions still struggling to be free. This nation, this idea called America, was and always will be a new world, our new world. At a workers' rally in a place called Branik on the outskirts of Prague, the idea called America is alive. A worker dressed in grimy overalls rises to speak at the factory gates, and he begins his speech to his fellow citizens with these words of a distant revolution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's no secret that here at home, freedom's door opened long ago. The cornerstones of this free society have already been set in place. Democracy, competition, opportunity, private investment, stewardship, and of course, leadership. And our challenge today is to take this democratic system of ours, a system second to none, and make it better. A better America, where there's a job for everyone who wants one, where women working outside the home can be confident their children are in safe and loving care, and where government works to expand child care alternatives for parents. Where we reconcile the needs of a clean environment and a strong economy, where made in the USA is recognized around the world as the symbol of quality and progress, and where every one of us enjoys the same opportunities to live, to work, and to contribute to society, and where for the first time the American mainstream includes all of our disabled citizens. Where everyone has a roof over his head and where the homeless get the help they need to live in dignity. Where our schools challenge and support our kids and our teachers, and where all of them make the grade. Where every street, every city, every school, and every child is drug-free. And finally, where no American is forgotten. Our hearts go out to our hostages who are ceaselessly on our minds and in our efforts. That's part of the future. We want to see the future we can make for ourselves, but dreams alone won't get us there. We need to extend our horizon, commit to the long view, and our mission for the future starts today. In the tough, competitive markets around the world, America faces the great challenges and great opportunities. And we know that we can succeed in the global economic arena of the 90s, but to meet that challenge, we must make some fundamental changes, some crucial investment in ourselves. Yes, we are going to invest in America. This administration is determined to encourage the creation of capital of all kinds, physical capital, everything from our farms and factories to our workshops and production lines, all that is needed to produce and deliver quality goods and quality services. intellectual capital, the source of ideas that spark tomorrow's products, and of course our human capital, the talented workforce that we'll need to compete in the global market. Let me tell you, if we ignore human capital, if we lose the spirit of American ingenuity, the spirit that is the hallmark of the American worker, that would be bad. The American worker is the most productive worker in the world. We need to save more. We need to expand the pool of capital for new investments that mean more jobs and more growth. And that's the idea behind a new initiative I call the Family Savings Plan, which I will send to Congress tomorrow. We need to cut the tax on capital gains, encourage risk takers, especially those in our small businesses, to take those steps that translate into economic reward, jobs, and a better life for all of us. We'll do what it takes to invest in America's future. The budget commitment is there. The money is there. It's there for research and development, R&D, a record high. It's there for our housing initiative, HOPE, H-O-P-E, to help everyone from first-time home buyers to the homeless. The money's there to keep our kids drug-free, 70% more than when I took office in 1989. It's there for space exploration, and it's there for education, another record high. And one more thing. Last fall at the Education Summit, the governors and I agreed to look for ways to help make sure that our kids are ready to learn the very first day they walk into the classroom. And I've made good on that commitment by proposing a record increase in funds, an extra $500 million for something near and dear to all of us, Head Start. Education is the one investment that means more for our future because it means the most for our children. Real improvement in our schools is not simply a matter of spending more. It's a matter of asking more, expecting more of our schools, our teachers, of our kids, of our parents, and ourselves. And that's why tonight I am announcing America's education goals developed with enormous cooperation from the nation's governors. And if I might, I'd like to say I'm very pleased that Governor Gardner and Governor Clinton, Governor Branstad, Governor Campbell, all of whom were very key in these discussions, these deliberations, are with us here tonight. By the year 2000, every child must start school ready to learn. The United States must increase the high school graduation rate to no less than 90%. And we are going to make sure our schools' diplomas mean something. In critical subjects, at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grades, we must assess our students' performance. By the year 2000, U.S. students must be the first in the world in math and science achievement. Every American adult must be a skilled, literate worker and citizen. every school must offer the kind of disciplined environment that makes it possible for our kids to learn. And every school in America must be drug-free. Ambitious aims, of course. Easy to do? Far from it. But the future's at stake. The nation will not accept anything less than excellence in education. And these investments will keep America competitive. And I know this about the American people. We welcome competition. We'll match our ingenuity, our energy, our experience and technology, our spirit and enterprise against anyone. But let the competition be free, but let it also be fair. America is ready. Since we really mean it, and since we're serious about being ready to meet that challenge, we're getting our own house in order. We have made real progress. 7 years ago, the federal deficit was 6% of our gross national product, 6%. In the new budget I sent up 2 days ago, the deficit is down to 1% of gross national product. That budget brings federal spending under control. It meets the Gramm-Rudman target. It brings that deficit down further and balances the budget by 1993 with no new taxes. And let me tell you, there's still more than enough federal spending. For most of us, $1.2 trillion is still a lot of money. And once the budget is balanced, we can operate the way every family must when it has bills to pay. We won't leave it to our children and our grandchildren. Once it's balanced, we will start paying off the national debt. And there's something more. There's something more we owe the generations of the future: stewardship, the safekeeping of America's precious environmental inheritance. It's just one sign of how serious we are. We will elevate the Environmental Protection Agency to cabinet rank. Not more bureaucracy, not more red tape, but the certainty that here at home, and especially in our dealings with other nations, environmental issues have the status they deserve. This year's budget provides over $2 billion in new spending to protect our environment, with over $1 billion for global change research, and a new initiative I call America the Beautiful, to expand our national parks and wildlife preserves and improve recreational facilities on public lands, and something else. Something that will help keep this country clean, from our forest land to the inner cities, and keep America beautiful for generations to come. The money to plant 1 billion trees a year. And tonight, let me say again to all the members of the Congress, the American people did not send us here to bicker. There is work to do, and they sent us here to get it done. And once again, in the spirit of cooperation, I offer my hand to all of you, and let's work together to do the will of the people. Clean air, child care, the Educational Excellence Act, crime and drugs, it's time to act. The Farm Bill, transportation policy, product liability reform, enterprise zones, it's time to act together. And there's one thing I hope we will be able to agree on. It's about our commitments. And I'm talking about Social Security. To every American out there on Social Security, to every American supporting that system today, and to everyone counting on it when they retire, we made a promise to you, and we are going to keep it. We rescued the system in 1983, and it's sound again. Bipartisan arrangement. Our budget fully funds today's benefits, and it assures that future benefits will be funded as well. And the last thing we need to do is mess around with Social Security. There's one more problem we need to address. We must give careful consideration to the recommendations of the health care studies underway now, and that's why tonight I'm asking Dr. Sullivan, Lou Sullivan, Secretary of Health and Human Services, to lead a domestic policy council review of recommendations on the quality, accessibility, and cost of our nation's health care system. I am committed to bring the staggering costs of health care under control. The state of the government does indeed depend on many of us in this very chamber. But the state of the union depends on all Americans. We must maintain the democratic decency that makes a nation out of millions of individuals. And I've been appalled at the recent mail bombings across this country. Every one of us must confront and condemn racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry, and hate. Not next week, not tomorrow, but right now, every single one of us. State of the Union. The State of the Union depends on whether we help our neighbor claim the problems of our community as our own. We've got to step forward when there's trouble, lend a hand, be what I call a point of light to a stranger in need. We've got to take the time after a busy day to sit down and read with our kids, help them with their homework, pass along the values we learned as children, and that's how we sustain the State of the Union. Every effort is important. It all adds up. It's doing the things that give democracy meaning. It all adds up to who we are and who we will be. And let me say that so long as we remember the American idea, so long as we live up to the American ideal, the State of the Union will remain sound and strong. And to those who worry that we've lost our way, well, I want you to listen to parts of a letter written by James Markwell, Private First Class James Markwell, a 20-year-old Army medic of the 1st Battalion, 75th Rangers. It's dated December 18th, the night before our armed forces went into action in Panama. It's a letter servicemen write and hope will never be sent. And sadly, Private Markwell's mother did receive this letter. She passed it along to me out there in Cincinnati. And here's some of what he wrote. I've never been afraid of death, but I know he is waiting at the corner. I've been trained to kill and to save, and so has everyone else. I am frightened what lays beyond the fog, and yet do not mourn for me. Revel in the life that I have died to give you. But most of all, don't forget, the Army was my choice, something that I wanted to do. Remember, I joined the Army to serve my country and ensure that you are free to do what you want and live your lives freely. Let me add that Private Markwell was among the first to see battle in Panama and one of the first to fall. But he knew what he believed in. He carried the idea we call America in his heart. I began tonight speaking about the changes we've seen this past year. There is a new world of challenges and opportunities before us. And there's a need for leadership that only America can provide. Nearly 40 years ago, in his last address to the Congress, President Harry Truman predicted such a time would come. He said, as our world grows stronger, more united, more attractive to men on both sides of the Iron Curtain, then inevitably there will come a time of change within the communist world. Today that change is taking place. For more than 40 years, America and its allies held communism in check and ensured that democracy would continue to exist. And today, with communism crumbling, our aim must be to ensure democracy's advance, to take the lead in forging peace and freedom's best hope, a great and growing commonwealth of free nations. And to the Congress and to all Americans, I say it is time to acclaim a new consensus at home and abroad, a common vision of the peaceful world we want to see. Here in our own hemisphere, it is time for all the peoples of the Americas, North and South, to live in freedom. In the Far East and Africa, it's time for the full flowering of free governments and free markets that have served as the engine of progress. It's time to offer our hand to the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, so that continent, for too long a continent divided, can see a future whole and free. It's time to build on our new relationship with the Soviet Union, to endorse and encourage a peaceful process of internal change toward democracy and economic opportunity. We're in a period of great transition, great hope, and yet great uncertainty. We recognize that the Soviet military threat in Europe is diminishing, but we see little change in Soviet strategic modernization. And therefore, we must sustain our own strategic offense modernization and the Strategic Defense Initiative. But the time is right to move forward on a conventional arms control agreement to move us to more appropriate levels of military forces in Europe, a coherent defense program that ensures the U.S. will continue to be a catalyst for peaceful change in Europe. And I've consulted with leaders of NATO. In fact, I spoke by phone with President Gorbachev just today. And I agree with our European allies that an American military presence in Europe is essential. and that it should not be tied solely to the Soviet military presence in Eastern Europe. But our troop levels can still be lower. And so tonight, I am announcing a major new step for a further reduction in U.S. and Soviet manpower in Central and Eastern Europe to 195,000 on each side. This level reflects the advice of our senior military advisors. It's designed to protect American and European interests and sustain NATO's defense strategy. A swift conclusion to our arms control talks, conventional, chemical, and strategic, must now be our goal. And that time has come. Still, we must recognize an unfortunate fact. In many regions of the world tonight, the reality is conflict, not peace. Enduring animosities and opposing interests remain. And thus, the cause of peace must be served by an America strong enough and sure enough to defend our interests and our ideals. It's this American idea that for the past 4 decades helped inspire this revolution of '89. And here at home and in the world, there is history in the making, history to be made. 6 months ago, early in this season of change, I stood at the gates of the Gdansk shipyard in Poland at the monument to the fallen workers of Solidarity. It's a monument of simple majesty. 3 tall crosses rise up from the stones, and atop each cross, an anchor, an ancient symbol of hope. The anchor in our world today is freedom, holding us steady in times of change, a symbol of hope to all the world. And freedom is at the very heart of the idea that is America. Giving life to the idea depends on every one of us. Our anchor has always been faith and family. The last few days of this past momentous year, our family was blessed once more, celebrating the joy of life when a little boy became our 12th grandchild. And I held the little guy for the first time. The troubles at home and abroad seem manageable and totally in perspective. And now I know, you're probably thinking, well, that's just a grandfather talking. Well, maybe you're right. But I've met a lot of children this past year across this country, as all of you have, everywhere from the Far East to Eastern Europe. And all kids are unique, and yet all kids are alike. The budding young environmentalists I met this month who joined me in exploring the Florida Everglades. The little leaguers I played catch with in Poland, ready to go from Warsaw to the World Series. And even the kids who are ill or alone. And God bless those border babies, born addicted to drugs and AIDS and coping with problems no child should have to face. But you know, when it comes to hope and the future, every kid is the same. Full of dreams, ready to take on the world, all special, because they are the very future of freedom. And to them belongs this new world I've been speaking about. And so tonight I'm going to ask something of every one of you. Let me start with my generation, with the grandparents out there. You are our living link to the past. Tell your grandchildren the story of struggles waged at home and abroad, of sacrifices freely made for freedom's sake, and tell them your own story as well, because every American has a story to tell. And parents, your children look to you for direction and guidance. Tell them of faith and family. Tell them we are one nation under God. Teach them that of all the many gifts they can receive, liberty is their most precious legacy. And of all the gifts they can give, the greatest is helping others. And to the children and young people out there tonight, with you rests our hope. All that America will mean in the years and decades ahead. Fix your vision on a new century, your century, on dreams we cannot see, on the destiny that is yours and yours alone. And finally, let all Americans, all of us together here in this chamber, the symbolic center of democracy, affirm our allegiance to this idea we call America, and let us remember that the state of the Union depends on each and every one of us. God bless all of you, and may God bless this great nation, the United States of America.
President George Bush, in his first State of the Union address, relatively brief, just over a half an hour in length, not interrupted by applause many times, but it did seem to be well received there in the House chamber. The most significant news, of course, to come out of this speech tonight is the president's announcement that he has proposed to the Soviet Union in a telephone call to Mikhail Gorbachev today that the United States will cut back, if we get commensurate cuts from the Soviet Union, will cut back its troops in Western Europe to 195,000. That's about 100,000 more than what he had proposed earlier. That's on the table in negotiations between the two. The administration figures that will work out to a savings of about $5 billion altogether. Jim Baker with another whispered encouragement to the president, his friend. Most of the proposals that the president made tonight, for example, the goals in education, in health care, in the environment, he made those proposals without attaching to them any proposals for finding the money. He said, well, we're spending enough at $1.2 trillion, and we do have a deficit. He talked about taxes only in two counts. One, we're not going to raise them. Two, we ought to have the capital gains tax cut, which will, in the eyes of a lot of Democrats, be a benefit primarily to the wealthy in this country or to those who are more privileged. President now disappearing outside the Capitol. NBC's John Cochran is our White House correspondent. John, in that telephone conversation with Mikhail Gorbachev today, did the president get any sense of how Gorbachev is responding to this idea for this very substantial troop cutback now?
Tom, from what little we know, we believe that Gorbachev only referred to that almost jocularly, jokingly, and that he really didn't give Bush much of a feel. They here at the White House are quoting what Gorbachev said in public, that it's nonsense that he's going to step down as the head of the Communist Party.
And what about the education goals? That was the other centerpiece of tonight's speech, the president talking about the year 2000 kind of as a goal now for us to make sure that every child who enters school is able to learn, that we have a workforce that is literate, that the people who enter school graduate in 12 years. He has been working very carefully with the governors of this country who are deeply involved in education, but will there be any additional federal money or programs to assist those programs?
Well, what you're seeing is actually a decrease in federal funding for education if you allow for inflation. There's actually some more money, but not if you count the inflation rate. And of course, this goal for the year 2000, George Bush will have long left the White House by that time, Tom.
Andrea Mitchell is standing by on Capitol Hill tonight. She covers Congress, the House, and the Senate for us. Andrea, give us a quick assessment of how you think this speech will be received when the lawmakers have a chance to reflect on it once the emotion of the moment passes.
Well, they will concede that it was a good political speech, but they will say that it was very short on specifics on how to pay for all of the priorities. We're expecting, as you know, the Speaker, Tom Foley, to give the Democratic response. He will brush very quickly over the foreign policy successes. They know that that is George Bush's strong point. He will criticize the president for his veto of the legislation that would have protected Chinese students here in the United States. But then he will move on to the domestic agenda. He is expected to say that it is the economic economic area that is the greatest challenge of the United States, not military problems any longer. And he's going to talk about democratic values. He will talk about Social Security, as of course the president did. He'll also mention, by the way, a couple of other political issues that are good for the Democrats, including a woman's right to choose an abortion. By the way, this is, of course, the speaker's real debut on the national stage. And as he's been preparing for this speech, Tom, he's been suffering from that flu bug that has gotten so many of us down.
All right, Andrea Mitchell and John Cochran will ask you to stand by there because in just a few moments we will be hearing from Speaker Thomas Foley of the state of Washington. He will have the Democratic Party version of the State of the Union as they see it from their side of the aisle. We'll be back with that right after this.
14-county drug sweep, the story at 11.
As we continue now from Washington, D.C., on the night that the President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, has delivered his first State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress, or to a gathering, really, of the senators and the members of the House, and also to the nation via television, we hear now the Democratic version of the State of the Union. It will be delivered this year by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Thomas Foley of Washington. He, of course, succeeded to that job when Speaker Jim Wright was forced to resign following questions about his conflict of interest, given some of the financial arrangements that he had back in his home state. One of the things that we'll want to be listening to tonight is whether Thomas Foley will now choose to pick a fight with the president on the whole question of whether or not there should be a cut in Social Security taxes, that among other things. Here now is the Speaker from his office in the Capitol building.
Good evening. I'm Tom Foley, the Speaker of the House. Earlier tonight, you may have seen me sitting behind President Bush as he delivered his address. The first time I was present for a State of the Union message, I was a young staff member working here in the Capitol for one of the giants of the United States Senate, Scoop Jackson of Washington State. It was the cold winter of 1962, a few months after the Berlin crisis, and President Kennedy spoke eloquently to the Congress and to the country of the burden and the glory of freedom. Today, as we begin a new decade, we join together to celebrate the glory of a new era of freedom. This new era is not a coincidence or an accident. It's coming in due in large measure to those who carried the burden for nearly half a century, presidents and people alike, defenders and dissenters, Congresses and administrations from Harry Truman to George Bush. In a special way, the credit goes to successive generations of young Americans, the 25 million who have served in the armed services since World War II, and the 350,000 who have been wounded or lost their lives. And in the end, the credit goes to all the American people who have paid the cost and stayed the course of a Cold War that was the longest conflict in American history, and perhaps the most fateful conflict in American history, modern history. Some doubted it could ever end, except in defeat or in flames. But we as a nation met John Kennedy's challenge to persevere, to look beyond our own shores and ambitions, and so we have helped, in Ronald Reagan's words, to turn the tide of history away from totalitarian darkness and into the warm sunlight of human freedom. The events are still unfolding, and the old world's new revolution of hope is still unfinished. But this is a time of honor and pride for America and for free men and women everywhere. We have a continuing obligation to fulfill, an obligation to those who struggle on from South Africa to China. Who could ever forget the bravery of one Chinese student who stood all alone in the front of a tank near Tiananmen Square and stopped it? We Democrats believe it was wrong for the Bush administration to yield to pressure from a communist dictatorship in Beijing. It was wrong for the president to veto a bill that would have safeguarded Chinese students in America from being sent back to their homeland's reign of repression. One lesson of the past 45 years is that no Congress and no president should be timid in the defense of freedom. There's another underlying truth in the ferment sweeping the globe. We are perhaps near the end of a great struggle, but we are certainly not at the end of history. The 1990s will be a period of profound and continuing change. This new decade marks more than a division of time, and it will lead to more than a new century, for there are new realities to be grasped, new challenges to be met, and very different battles to be won. In the 1990s and well into the next century, the central challenge for America will be economic, not military. The greatest test of our strength will be our classrooms, not our missile silos. The gravest threat will come not from any nation's attempt at world domination, but from every nation's complicity in the worldwide destruction of the environment. This period of vast change will be a period of fundamental choice. Much of what the President said tonight I agree with. Some of what he said I disagree with. But my purpose here is not to debate point by point. I'm here to tell you what we as Democrats believe, where we stand, the values we hold, the vision we have, and the choices we face. First, we believe that we must renew our economic capacity and regain control of our economic destiny. Today, the America that invented the computer chip and the VCR has seen its market share shrink or vanish in both products. We are falling dramatically behind in new technologies, such as high-definition television. As Democrats, we're not satisfied with the trend that has seen this nation drop from first to sixth in the standard of living. We're not satisfied to be told that within 10 years, the average West German worker may earn 150% as much as the average American worker. We're not satisfied to have American students ranked near the bottom of the industrial nations in math and science. We will set a national goal of making our schools once again the best in the world by the year 2000. On this issue, the President's words seem to agree with us, but his actions say something else. You can't become the education president with all the problems we face by proposing a meager 2% increase in the education budget. That's a fact, and for all the talk, that's exactly what the President proposes to do. We also believe that American corporations have the responsibility and should have the opportunity to reinvest in America. We believe that the wave of corporate mergers and leveraged buyouts is a waste of resources. It leaves Wall Street raiders with large sums of money in their pockets, and it leaves our companies overburdened with debt and weakened in competing for world markets. This issue represents another real difference between us and the Republicans. For too many years, their policies have encouraged debt and quick profit instead of investment and long-term growth. The result, the amount of private resources put into research and development has fallen in real dollars. It's imperative to reverse this trend and to secure America's place on the frontiers of enterprise and invention. At the same time, we must demand that nations trading with us give our products an equal chance in their markets. Products ranging from the innovations of the service sector to the abundant harvest of American agriculture. Make no mistake about it, we favor expanding trade, but we reject the idea of one-way free trade. We believe this nation should be in the business of exporting the goods our workers make, not the jobs our workers need. We also believe in encouraging a rise in savings, which have collapsed to a record low during the 1980s. The Republicans say they want to do this in part by cutting the capital gains tax, a cut which would give 80% of the benefits to the richest 1% of Americans. Instead, we are fighting to restore IRAs so middle-income families can save as much as $2,000 a year tax-free and then use the money for their own retirement or as a down payment on a first home. We took on the struggle against capital gains when the odds were against us. We won last year, and this year we will do all we can to make sure that the greatest part of any tax cut of any kind goes to those of you who live on a paycheck, not just the few who have the highest incomes, the largest stock portfolios, and by the way, the potential for the biggest tax shelters. This issue goes to the heart of the reason we are Democrats. Above all else, we stand with you, the people who go to work and pay the taxes. It is your cause to which we are committed, and your side on which we fight. So we will also fight for the most effective clean air bill, even though that may offend entrenched and powerful interests. We will fight for child care so that working parents don't have to choose between their family's standard of living and their children's standard of care. We will fight for campaign finance reform. We disagree with the administration's opposition to limits on campaign spending. Let's be blunt about it. Don't we all know there's simply too much money being raised and being spent in American politics? And there is another issue on which we have only just begun to fight. This administration's practice of misusing the Social Security Trust Fund to hide the size of the federal budget deficit. Social Security involves more than a trust fund. It involves the basic bond of trust between our people and our government. From the beginning, Social Security has been the Democratic Party's proudest achievement. We reject the suggestion of some Republicans to privatize the system. They say that's a new idea. We think it's the same old bad idea, another version of the repeated Republican attempt to undermine Social Security. Finally, as Democrats, we believe that there are areas where the government simply does not belong. We will continue to defend a woman's right to choose, for we are convinced that politicians cannot and should not attempt to make the choice. But we also believe government can have a positive role, not to dominate, but to help people improve their own lives. The reason we have so many homeless in America today is not because government has cared too much, but because it has cared too little. We have to do better than that on a whole range of critical needs. We will seek to secure the right of all of our children to learn in better schools and to earn a better life. We will seek to secure the civil rights of all our people. We can't celebrate freedom abroad and then deny freedom at home. We are also committed to the strongest possible attack on the drugs that are attacking our society and our families. On this, we are all united. Narcotics destroy the children of Democrats and Republicans alike. One of my first jobs was as deputy prosecutor in my hometown of Spokane, Washington. I believed then, and I believe now, in enforcing the law, not in legalizing drugs. We won't win this struggle overnight, or in a few months, or even over a year or two. But together we can begin to reclaim our streets and our schools and our neighborhoods. Let me say it again. We will work with the president wherever and whenever we can. On some issues we will have differences because we care deeply about certain principles and about the people who have been the abiding concern of the Democratic Party. Today, we Democrats stand, as we have before, for working families. We stand for both economic justice and economic opportunity, for protecting the environment, for senior citizens and the soundness of Social Security. And where we must, we will disagree with this administration. We will stand our ground when that is the only way we can stand for you. Above all else, we have high ambitions for America in the 1990s. We cannot be content to be bystanders, riders on the storm of history. For we are living in one of those rare seasons of change that come to few generations. We are being challenged by countries who say America is in decline, that we can never again be the best in the world marketplace. We do not accept that. We reject those who assume that Americans aren't smart enough, or disciplined enough, or tough enough to rise to the moment. We were in the 1940s, and we saved the post-war world. Now we must strengthen our own country. The time has come for America to help herself, to rebuild, to re-energize, to reinvigorate our hopes, to gather together our talents and reclaim our place in the world. In the short span of this decade, we have a long way to move as a nation. Let us resolve that on that day, when America enters the 21st century, we shall be first. First economically, first in education and science, first in human decency and human rights. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless our country. Good night.
House Speaker Thomas Foley speaking from his private office in the Capitol just behind me there tonight, responding to the President of the United States who made his State of the Union address. As you can see, both the President and the Speaker have the same goals. How they get there, of course, they'll choose different paths. There are some very sharp differences between the President and the Speaker of the House, between the Republicans and the Democrats, especially on the issue of how you fund the education reform that is needed in this country, how you pay for the environmental changes that the President and the Speaker talked about, but especially also about the issue of abortion and how the President conducted himself on the issue of China, specifically the question of whether or not we should have extended the visas for the Chinese students who are in this country. We'll have a complete analysis of all this tomorrow morning, beginning with NBC News at sunrise, followed by Today. I'll see you tomorrow night on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News in Washington.
This has been an NBC News special report.
Morning from Capitol Hill to the man in the street. We'll have reactions to the President's State of the Union address.
And in our Where Are They Now series, we'll meet